Hello class, my name is Ellis Daniels and I'll be presenting Curt Flood in the History of Free Agency. Here's the early life of Curt Flood. Curt Flood was born on January 18, 1938 to Herman and Laura Flood. He was the youngest of 6 children. Although he was born in Houston, Texas, Flood was primarily raised in Oakland, California. His family moved from East Oakland to West Oakland to avoid growing hostility of local whites after World War II. The family experienced racial tension in the middle-class neighborhood of East Oakland, which was the motivations behind the decision to move to a less affluent area in West Oakland. Laura Flood, who was from the South, knew the extent of the effect racial bigotry would have on her children and was determined to move them to a place she thought they would be safe. This choice shielded Curt from the racial injustices that were going on in the world around him, and this would be evident in his adult life when he would be faced with it head-on. As a child, Flood showed an early aptitude for athleticism and art. In junior high school, Curt impressed his art teacher with his skills. He attempted to develop in him a broader appreciation for his talents. Curt will also carry this notion with him when he would get into baseball. Curt was asked to create artistic backgrounds for school proms, plays, and even earn money by designing window displays for local stores. Flood would later go on to paint portraits of Cardinals owner and even Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Curt's first experience with baseball was at 9 years old when he joined a midget league called the Juniors Sweet Shop. The Juniors Sweet Shop was managed by George Pals. Pals also coached at Hoover Junior High School, McClemens High School, and local amateur leagues. While Curt was attending junior high, he played for Pals on the Bill Earn American Legion team. Pals also coached Flood when he was attending McClemens High School. The two developed a very close relationship while honing Curt's natural talent. Curt played third base and hit .440 while with the Legion team in 1954. In 1955, he was named captain of the team, and he helped in leading the team to the state championship that year. During his tenure with the Cincinnati Redlegs, Powell was a bird dog scout for the Cincinnati Redlegs, and upon Curt's graduation in 1956 from high school, he signed a contract with them for $4,000. Back then, that was a lot of money. The Redlegs training camp was an abrupt awakening for Curt in regards to the tough reality of racism in America. Flood had been shielded from the growing racial contention in America while he was living in California during his adolescence. Flood played well despite the hurdles of the team environment due to racial strife in the 1950s. For example, during trips to games, if the team made a stop for food, Flood was often not able to eat at restaurants with his teammates. He would either be ushered through the back door of the establishment, or he would not even be allowed in at all, and would have to depend on one of his teammates to bring him a meal while he waited on the bus. There were also times when Curt was not permitted to use the restroom at rest stops, forcing the bus to pull over while he relieved himself on some stretch of highway. He also experienced derogatory remarks being screamed at him during games. He often was ostracized by his teammates and the team staff. Of this time, Flood was quoted saying, "What had started as a chance to test my baseball ability in a professional setting had become an obligation to measure myself as a man. These brutes were trying to destroy me. If they could make me collapse and quit, it would verify their preconceptions and would wreck my life. Pride was my resource. I solved my problems by playing my guts out." Flood transferred his frustrations and hurt into motivation to be the best. He led the league with a .340 batting average, 388 putouts, and set a team record with 29 home runs. He was also named the league's Player of the Year. In December 1957, Flood was traded to the St. Louis Cardinals with a contract for $5,000 for the 1958 season. During his tenure with the St. Louis Cardinals, Flood began the 1958 season with the Cardinals. After hitting a .340 batting average in just 13 games, he was assigned to take over as the starting center fielder by manager Fred Hutchinson. He did well for a few months, but eventually his productivity faltered slightly, although defensively he had received many accolades for his ability in center field. Flood's rookie season was considered subpar by his standards, finishing the season batting .261 and 50 runs scored in 121 games. From 1958 to 1961, the Cardinals went through multiple management changes under which Curt suffered both emotionally and professionally. Once Johnny Keane was hired in 1961, Flood's skills again began to flourish. Under Keane, Flood was installed as the permanent center fielder. From 1962 to 1968, Curt experienced career-high numbers. He was vital in the team winning 2 World Series in 1964 and 1967. From 1965 to 1969, Curt was team co-captain along with another teammate. He also won the Gold Glove Award 6 times during this period. In 1968, he was on the cover of Sports Illustrated, where he was called baseball's best center fielder. Curt's popularity during this period increased immensely. This afforded him the resources to create the Curt Flood Associates, Inc. He opened a photography studio with focus on capitalizing on the school picture business in the St. Louis area. While Curt received so much popularity in 1969, this also turned out to be when he became unpopular with the Cardinals. Flood was offered a $5,000 raise, which would have brought his salary to $77,500. He rejected and demanded no less than $90,000. His demand became public knowledge and did not sit well with team officials. During spring training, Curt's brother robbed a jewelry store and took hostages, thus causing a media storm and negative publicity for the Cardinals. Flood was subsequently removed as the team's co-captain. On October 8, 1969, Flood received notice that he was being traded to the Phillies. Flood was offered $100,000 to sign with the Phillies for the 1970 season. He declined as he did not want to go to Philadelphia and leave the life he built in St. Louis. The year just grew worse and worse for Flood before culminating to the event that would define his legacy. Here you can see this is a notice to player of release or transfer. Essentially, this was the notice of trade Flood received on October 8, 1969. This clause originated at the end of the 1879 National League season. A player was bound to a team for as long as the team deemed they were needed. Even after the contract expired, players remained tied to the team. He could be traded, sold, or released at any time under the reserve clause. This limited a player's salary with regard to what he could earn in the free market or free agency as they call it now. This clause gave the owners all the power and control as players had no say in their fate. It was almost impossible to challenge the clause due to baseball being exempt from antitrust laws in regards to labor. On December 24th, 1969, Kurt wrote a letter to baseball's commissioner, Bowie Kuhn, asking to be made a free agent and protesting his trade. Bowie was sympathetic, but essentially said that his hands were tied due to the reserve clause. Flood consulted a local attorney who proposed that he sue Major League Baseball. Kurt then turned to Marvin Miller, executive director of the Players Union, for advice. Marvin Miller informed Flood that the odds of him winning any case against the league were stacked incredibly high. He also stressed that Flood would likely not benefit from his victory if he somehow did win. Also, that he would certainly never play baseball again no matter the outcome. Kurt's response was if it would help other players, he was willing to go the distance for what he believed was only right. Miller took Flood to plead his case in front of the Players Association Executive Committee to seek financial support. With the blessing of the committee, Kurt moved forward with the attorney Arthur Goldberg, a former colleague of Miller's. Arthur Goldberg was a former Secretary of Labor under President Kennedy and a former Associate Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. Someone of Goldberg's caliber was needed to give them any chance at a victory. The trial of Flood versus Kuhn began on May 19, 1970, in federal court in New York City. The case lasted 3 weeks, and the court ruled in favor of the owners, of course. After another loss in appeals, the case was brought to the Supreme Court, who also ruled against Flood 5-3. Although they ruled against Flood, some of the Supreme Court judges agreed with his logic, but just felt it was an issue Congress had to correct. Thus sparks the birth of free agency. Although Flood lost, his historic case paved the way for many other players to challenge for federal arbitration of salary demand, which the MLB eventually agreed to in 1973. Then in 1975, two players, Andy Messersmith and Dave McNally, under the guise of Marvin Miller, decided not to sign their renewed contracts with their respective teams. The Players Association filed grievances for both players. It was decided that the hearing would be heard by a 3-member arbitration panel. This consisted of John Guerin, who represented the owners, Marvin Miller, who represented the players, and Peter Sace, who represented impartially. Miller and Guerin unsurprisingly ruled in favor of their respective parties' interests, so the ultimate decision rested on Peter Sace. Miller was very anxious and anticipating Sace going in favor of the owners. When Miller received the decision on December 23rd, he was pleasantly surprised to see that Sace ruled in favor of the players. Messersmith and McNally were free agents. Following Sace's decision, all owners could do was bargain with players under the new basic agreement. Sace's decision ultimately eradicated the reserve clause, thus paving the way for free agency as we know it today. Just to go over some things with Kurt's legacy, he retired with a lifetime batting average of .293 with 1,861 hits, 85 home runs, and 851 runs. He published a memoir that same year detailing his time in baseball and his reasoning for standing up against the reserve clause. He would go on to leave the United States due to bankruptcy and other money issues. He returned to the U.S. in 1975 after living in multiple areas across Europe. In 1995, Kurt was diagnosed with throat cancer. He passed away on January 20th, 1997, just 2 days after his 59th birthday. Flood was finally acknowledged by Congress in 1998 with the Kurt Flood Act. This would ultimately eliminate baseball's antitrust exemption in regard to labor issues. Flood's fight against the reserve clause, although it destroyed his career, its lasting effects continues to benefit players to this very day. Something was